right. Welcome into today's webinar. This is the webinar entitled The Missing Link to Resource Utilization Warehouse Orchestration. And today we're going to be talking about the utilization blind spot, why tracking isn't the same as optimizing. And we're going to dive into that. So thanks to those that are dialing in here and joining us today, whether it's in the morning for you, if you're on the West Coast, or on your lunch hour right now. If will there be a recording already in the comments? Yes, we will definitely have a recording that you can share later on. Devin, thanks for joining us. So wherever you are in the world today, let us know in the comments. We would love to know what you're doing, whether you're eating breakfast or whether you're having lunch with us right now. So appreciate everybody joining and coming in here on the platform. If you are tuned in, if you have questions or you have your own thoughts or observations that you would like to share at any point, feel free to do those in the comment section. We can see those and we will do our best to answer any questions or field any thoughts as well. We would also love your input on the topic today as well as we progress through the conversation. So thank you everybody who has joined us thus far. So today we are going to dive into talking about utilization within warehouse operations. We're going to talk a little bit about a industry report that we have worked on in collaboration with Autoscheduler, who will be joining me today. And that focus of that report was on utilization and asset utilization in particular, how to track it, how to look at it, and then how to take it to the next level to optimize your operations and then ultimately get to orchestration. So we'll dive into a little bit of the report, the why of the report. We'll talk a little bit about what we've uncovered as the gray zone of utilization. Then we'll talk about tracking versus optimization, get to warehouse orchestration. We'll talk a little bit about how Autoscheduler is helping with that orchestration and also their new warehouse decision agent. And then we'll do a little bit of a case study talking about how that warehouse decision agent has helped a beverage company. So joining me today is Keith Moore. He is the CEO of Autoscheduler.ai. So Keith, welcome in. How are you today, sir?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Happy to have you on here. Always a pleasure to talk to Keith. We've had him on the podcast a few times and happy we could work together on this report and present it to you today as well. So let's kick things off here, Keith. And I hear your dog chiming in too. So
Oh
welcome
yeah,
to your
they're
dogs
real
as well.
excited this is happening.
Yeah, they're very excited about utilization, right? And especially orchestration. I'm sure those pups are definitely. So
Yeah.
happy to have you join us here. So let's kick it off here. In the beginning of our report, we used a quote from you. And the quote is, there are more ways to run a warehouse on any given day than there are atoms in the universe, right? So let's start there and tell us a little bit about what does that quote mean to you and where does that kind of come from?
Yeah. So it's when you think about warehouses, right? And obviously we do, right? Warehouses are sexy,
Oh,
shirt behind you,
yes,
but
100%.
not everybody in supply chain thinks about them that way. And so when we were trying to describe, most like if you talk to a VP of supply chain or somebody that's really senior, it's, we have distribution and the nodes just kind of figure it out. And when we were starting the company, we were trying to think of, I don't think everybody understands how challenging it is on the floor of a warehouse to actually do the job day in and day out. Because you have a massive amount of data that is coming your way, all sorts of different flows that need to be maintained, customer service that is getting harder and harder to actually make sure that you're meeting, right? Demand that's volatile. And there are all these different decision points that leadership has to make. And so when we were trying to articulate, well, how do you actually think about this from a mathematical perspective? This level of combinatorial optimization, actually, it's true. There's more ways to run your warehouse in a day than there are atoms in the universe because there's an infinite number of ways to actually execute the workload in front of you. And not everybody at the management level really understands that. And so the quote there, while mathematically true, is
Sure.
really designed to help articulate for people that may not necessarily be in the know and understand how challenging it is on the floor, just what people have to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, there's so many things that are moving and happening, right? Not only from the resources perspective of human capital, right? But also from an asset perspective. And that's one of the reasons we took a look at this in this report, to understand that as we see, warehouses are kind of these competitive battlegrounds. We called it in the report, right? And it's kind of, how do we understand, where do we put the time, where do we put the resources, where do we invest the capital, right, to be able to do these things, and then get the most out of what we've invested in, right? So when we look at this, we see that organizations, they're, pouring billions of dollars into different resources, whether it's from a labor perspective, an automation perspective, facility perspective, real estate, right? And labor costs continue to rise up to 40%, we saw, and also rent as well, up 44%, were our findings from the report. So when we look at that, right, we really want to address that and understand, how do we make the most of what we're investing in, right? And I think that's kind of what the why of the report was, and how we're going to talk about that today, right? So the report itself is titled Warehouse Orchestration: The Missing Link to Resource Utilization. And everybody that is tuned in here today or has registered will receive a copy of that report as well. So Keith, let's talk a little bit about the why here. Like, why is it important to understand utilization in operations, and why spend time focusing on this topic to develop a report around it?
Yeah. So utilization, like, very ubiquitous term. It could mean a lot of different things, right? And I think you've done a really good job in this report on helping frame where it is, where people are, and giving people kind of benchmarks to say, I am here versus the rest of my peers in network. So I would highly encourage everybody go read it.
Mm,
Kevin and the team that put it together did an awesome job. But as far as auto scheduler is concerned, and why do we care about utilization, you have to think about the fundamental objective of a warehouse. Every warehouse has two goals, and they're not competing. Well, they are competing to a degree, but goal number one is maximize service.
mhm,
Your job is to ship everything that needs to ship downstream exactly when it needs to go, right? It's not early, not late, exactly on time, so that the rest of the supply chain can keep flowing. And objective number two is to meet goal number one for the least amount of cost possible. So how do you maximize service and how do you minimize cost? And sites struggle across those two goals, whether it's on the service front or on the cost front, but it's a constant balance on how you do that well. And when you start to think about the actual margins of operating a warehouse, when you're looking at cost, you're starting to think about, how am I leveraging the resources at my disposal as optimally as possible? And I'll
mm,
make a very specific example, which is, I run my warehouse labor resources, which are really talented people, my associates on the floor, in shifts. So A shift is going to have 80 people come in, B shift is going to have 60 people come in. And that's kind of how I expect my flow to work on a given day. Just example A, right?
sure.
Um, but the problem is, orders don't come in to meet the order demand is volatile. So you're not always going to have a guaranteed 80 people worth of work on A shift and 60 people worth of work on B shift. And so warehouses have to constantly think about, what does the demand signal look like? What am I forecasting? What do I actually have? What's already exists, right? And this is simple. We're talking labor. These are complex flows with MHE, automation, inventory, space constraints, all these different considerations. And when you're thinking about resource utilization, you want to constantly be sitting at close to 100% or 80 to 100% usually. So
Mm,
if you're paying for those resources to be in the building, and even automation, right? AGVs, ASRS, you're paying for that resource. If you're going to pay for your resources, you want it to be a productive resource and not have downtime. And so resource utilization is kind of the frontier of saying, how well am I using the resources I have today? And orchestration is the initiative, is saying, how do I maximize that utilization of resources so that I am constantly meeting service, but also balancing when they're available to make sure that I'm reducing the overall net cost of the operation. Was that an all encompassing kind of why for you, or do we need to go into
yeah,
detail in
that
any of
was
that?
that was certainly all encompassing, I will say, and
Yeah.
we'll go into a little more details, I think, further in the conversation. But great way to put it, right? And I think at the end of the day, right, especially as we see more and more coming into our operations from an asset, from a resource perspective, whether it's on the labor side or addressing some of the lack of labor from shortages and things like that, looking at automation and things like that. When we invest that capital, that money, right, we want to, as you said, get what our money is worth, right? And make sure that we're maximizing that utilization. So I want to call to the audience here and ask on from a utilization perspective, how confident are you in the accuracy of your current utilization data? Because this is something that we explored in the report as well. And when we look at that, right, we saw that 71.4% expressed uncertainty, right? So a large percentage of those that we spoke to were uncertain in the actual utilization that we saw there. So what are your thoughts on that, Keith?
Man, super true. So in
Mhm.
order to understand your utilization, right, there's a few different ways people go about it, but more often than not, this is not data that is accurately tracked today. So
Mhm.
the first thing that you need to understand is, what do I have at my availability? And then from, labor is a little bit easier. So there's really great systems like labor management platforms that help you understand on a per person basis, how well is that labor performing against a standard that we've either calculated, derived, um, or set. But understanding net flow utilization on what should I have been able to do across my facility, accounting for labor, accounting for space, accounting for MHE, accounting for automation, accounting for inventory availability. Um, that number is a little bit murkier. Nobody
Mm.
quite understands that. So, you think, okay, if I know how productive every person is, I know how productive the site is, but that's not actually true at all. A site is an amalgamation of complex flows that have to perfectly hand off in order to execute the end goal of shipping on time.
Mm.
And so 71% of people saying they're not sure what their overall utilization is, that 100% tracks. Like, I
Yeah.
think I think a lot of sites feel good about labor and not great about everything else.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and that was definitely part of the findings too, was, seeing that, okay, people have certain things that they're confident in that they're tracking the utilization of, and then certain things that they're not quite sure, or they're not necessarily 100% certain that their utilization, maybe they have a number, right? But maybe they're not confident in that number exactly, right? So we have some people chiming in here in the comments. So Todd says resource utilization at 100% implies that you are constrained. Definitely 100% agree with
Yeah,
that, right?
100% in on that.
Yes. And Jonathan says definitely have mixed results across assets around utilization. To Keith's point, defining what 100% looks like across the full spectrum of the operation is a huge challenge, right? And I think I love the word you said there, an amalgamation of all these different things, right? Coming together. It's like, okay, well, I'm measuring this, but how do we bring that together to understand overall utilization? And I think we'll talk a little bit about that here today. So we uncovered kind of this gray zone of utilization, so to speak, right? So we saw that 100% of the respondents track labor and storage, right? But the way that they're doing it, what we found is pretty outdated, right? We saw that 43% are using their kind of foundational baseline WMS, right? 29% using manual spreadsheets, right? Definitely outdated there. And I would question confidence in that utilization a little bit, right, on that side. And then 14% only using an orchestration platform. So, Keith, tell us, why is there such a difference in the market on how people are tracking these items?
Right, because objective number one is service at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And some sites, I mean, some people may not track all of these items. So objective one
Right.
is service. And so long as you're meeting your service levels and nobody's yelling at you about cost, then
Sure.
like, cool, we'll keep living. The challenge, especially with the economy over the last few years, is that margins have gotten tighter. Supply chains have really had to come back and say, we have clients that we're working with that go to every site and they're like, you're going to go find 10% capacity. Like, I don't care how you do it,
Mm,
your budget's dropping by this amount. And labor rates aren't dropping. So it's
mm,
not like you can just cut everybody's pay. Go figure out how to do this. And so people are implementing all sorts of different strategies, and there's kind of an evolution to this, right? Step one is just saying, I have it on a spreadsheet. What do I have? Step two is you're getting all this really good if you have a WMS good transactional data inside of that WMS, especially using RF guns or scanners, right? Scan to scan how long things are taking, and you can start to kind of track utilization in that capacity. And that's what labor management has done really well and enabled for people. But the third area, and when you say like, why is there the disparity? Like, why are there so few people using orchestration?
Hmm.
Most people don't actually understand what that is from like, how does orchestration relate to utilization as a whole? And so I'm going to kind of paint a picture for you there, which is, and you take auto scheduler and everything I do out of it.
Sure.
Step one, start documenting things. Step two is start to do that programmatically and digitally in a way that's usable. And that's kind of the LMS level. Step three is if you understand the state of the possible and the art of the possible for a facility. So if I go in, I'm at my wall meeting for 8 a.m. about to start shift. Everybody has this idea of we're going to ship 40,000 cases today, or here's how many orders we
Mm-hmm.
want to do today, right? How do they come up with that number? They come up with that number through this combination of math that somebody does to
Hmm.
say, here's the order flow and here's kind of about what we think. And, this is where we are, right? Orchestration is taking all of that, doing it in a much more systematic way and saying, of all the demand we know about in the infinite horizon, which most sites, that's not more than 48 hours, right? Because you're then getting into forecasts. Here is exactly what you're going to do on this shift. And here's what the shift after is going to do. You're going to start working 37 outbound loads. You're going to unload 12 inbounds. Here's how many products are on them. Here's the mix of those products. Here's exactly how long it's going to take, right? We might have an LMS already. We have all those standards. So for my A shift coming in, I know all the detail of what I should be able to do. And I can then map that all the way back into, I know based on that detail, I might have 30 people scheduled to come in. I only need 25 of them. I can make the decision on if I'm going to keep all 30 or I'm going to 4 hours in decide to decrew. But when we talk about orchestration for utilization, it's about setting the target, right? Everybody knows what they did historically, but now it's what should we be able to do? What should our cost per unit actually look like as a facility? And are we attaining that goal on an hour by hour, shift by shift, day by day basis? And use that to inform resource utilization instead of just looking backwards, right? We don't drive down the highway looking in the rearview mirror,
Yeah.
right? You look out the windshield, and that's kind of when we talk about orchestration for resource utilization. That's how you need to think about running the site. You need to think about what you should be able to do, and then your attainment of that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for so long, right, we were kind of looking, and I think back to, my warehouse operation days being in there and managing. And, we're always looking at the metrics from, like 5 days before, right? And it's kind of like, oh, what happened that went wrong last Wednesday, right? But it's kind of like, well, why can't we get to the point where we're seeing like, well, how do we just do the right thing tomorrow on Thursday, right? So there is kind of a gap within there in terms of that visibility, like this gray zone that we kind of identified in the report. So we're seeing, and you talked about, kind of looking at these different parts of the operation, right? And we're tracking maybe this, maybe we're not tracking this, we're tracking this one way, we're tracking this a different way. Like, how do we bring that together? So what we found is that, everyone sees some of what is happening, but no one has kind of the complete picture overall, which it sounds like we need to get to in order to get to that orchestration level that you were just talking about. So what we found from those that we surveyed and polled, 43% of respondents have no real-time visibility into asset usage, and 57% had only partial visibility. So when we look at that, and we look at, the number of 43% using their WMS to track this utilization, right? Tell us, like, why is the reliance on WMS alone, why is that insufficient to be able to get to kind of this real-time visibility, and ultimately real-time decision making is what we want?
Yeah. So I want to start by saying how critical the WMS. So everything I'm about to say is not bashing WMS. I think it's highlighting the
Sure.
limitations of WMS. Um, WMS is the most critical piece of software infrastructure that you need in a facility because it does two things perfectly. That perfectly is anybody who has implemented WMS knows perfectly is a stretch goal.
Yeah, yeah, cool.
But
People are like,
yeah,
"Perfect." Mm.
yeah, yeah. All right, all right. I'll it does things well. Thing
Yes.
number one is inventory tracking. WMSs are really good at giving you the ground truth. Here is the current state of our warehouse, where everything is, and then managing some of the orders and inbounds that need to be kind of handled. So step one, it is the source of truth for a lot of this data. It is the warehouse database, to use
Mhm,
the software term. The second thing is WMS is really good at task management. So it is not necessarily doing a huge amount of critical thinking, but my WMS is interfacing with somebody on the floor with a scanner. And when they scan a piece of inventory, it says that's going on order 1234, bring it to dock door 12, right? It enables a person to take action on inventory
mm,
by actually giving them kind of putting the pieces together to say, this order has that item, we've allocated that item to the order, and here's what you need to do. So it's systemic in being able to actually take action on all of the different pieces. But what it doesn't do is critical thinking. So
mm.
this is where the limitation is and why people are saying, hey, I only have partial visibility and my WMS alone doesn't really give me my resource utilization. Your WMS has all the data potentially to tell you what is going to happen. But that's where the combinatorial optimization comes in. This is a huge math problem. Like you have to math
Mm,
through every bit of this is a singular order. Here's a singular truck that is going out in a facility. This truck has 42 different orders on it,
mhm.
which are going to be picked by 7 different flows in the building, one of which has a unique item group that has a special process that I need to account for. The WMS will create all of those tasks perfectly because
Sure.
it is heuristic driven. What it's not doing though is saying for that one shipment, how does that align with the 42 other shipments that I'm going to work throughout the day, the 80 people that I have on first shift and the 60 people I have on second shift? And what's the exact perfect way to sequence this work so that all of it gets done to maximize the global optimal of the facility, which is I want to ship as much as I possibly can on time with the least amount of people and the least amount of MHE that I possibly need. So you'll maximize service,
Mm,
minimize overall cost. And so that level of thinking just isn't something a WMS presents. And so it does the execution, but not the, okay, here's what the next hour looks like. Here's what the next 8 hours looks like. Here's what the next 24 hours looks like. And that's the gap today with just running on the WMS. People are
yeah.
solving that with spreadsheets, with systems, with homegrown reporting, all sorts of tooling that is imperfect in nature, but better than what the WMS offers.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, very interesting points there, and I think, what getting to that critical thinking level that you mentioned, right, I think is the greatest way to kind of simply explain the orchestration, right? Is like it's going to do that. It's going to line those things up, like you said. Okay, well, all this stuff has to go in this one truck, right? But it's going through these various different avenues, and how do we make sure we do that in the best way possible, essentially, to make that all come together, and then make sure it makes sense as it moves throughout the supply chain too, further down the line as well. So I'm curious, when it comes to looking beyond the WMS, right, and other options that give us closer to this real-time visibility or actual real-time visibility and ultimately decision making. Do you find, and obviously, you're with auto scheduler, you guys are focused on orchestration, right? So you have this conversation
I'm
a
biased.
lot, I'm sure, right? But I certainly heard the word orchestration popping up more and more at Manifest this year, I will
Mhm.
say. Do you think that there has just been a general lack of awareness of like what you can do beyond the WMS from this visibility perspective?
Yeah, oh, 100%, right?
Mm,
And it's like there's levels to this stuff as always.
sure.
Why is orchestration becoming this more prevalent term? And it, certainly in warehousing, but also in planning and transportation and all these other things is because I think we have for the last 20 years had the exact same systems that run execution across supply chain, right? You have your ERP, you have your TMS, you have your WMS, your advanced planning solution, and they
Mm,
all kind of live inside of the bubble that they operate. And they've done it really well for a period of time. And so there's been no need to innovate. But what people are starting to see, and especially, I could go on my whole narrative about like the cloud introduced big data, which introduced more software, which now introduces a lot more data, and decision making is the next level of bottleneck. So let's take that to a warehouse and say your WMS has been doing what it does for a really long period of time, but I'm now realizing the criticality in the data to help me inform and make decisions or automate decisions completely inside of the building. And that data is, we'll call it 75 to 85% in a WMS. But if I'm at a
Mhm.
plant, for example, so I'm a plant that is a finished goods plant that is receiving data from a production line, maybe feeding raw materials to production as well, and shipping out to customers, right? Not all the data I need is in the WMS. There's data I need from my production scheduling system. I need data from my transportation systems to tell me if trailers are on the yard or when they're going to arrive. I need data from my yard management system to tell me what my availability in the yard looks like. So we started to introduce more software around these core systems that we had. And that more software introduces more data, which introduces more decision points that need to be made and triggered across different systems. And so in the warehouse, what people are seeing is this decision overload has created it's not a data problem anymore. Maybe it was
Mm.
5 years ago, right?
Interesting. Okay.
It's a decision problem. And the people are the things that tie it all together right now.
Mm.
People, their spreadsheets, their reports. And so I would just highlight for everybody here that this term orchestration coming up is not by happenstance. It's by nature of what we've developed inside of
Mm.
our supply chain ecosystem. And that the next logical thing that we need to do, given that we're providing all this data, is we need to enable our people to better make decisions with this data, which is what orchestration software does. Pull it all into one place, inform decisions, execute decisions, let people do what they're good at, which is manage people.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. People creating people problems, right? In a
Oh,
sense,
yeah.
right? So, I mean, very interesting there, and I think definitely I see too, the lack of awareness because the more things, right, what we're talking about here is kind of overarching, right? We're seeing these advancements, these evolutions of the technology, the evolutions of the solutions that we can potentially put into our operations, but as we add those on and stack those on to what we're doing, right, then it does become a little more disparate, a little more disconnected
Mhm.
on like, okay, well, how does this one function with this one, right? Like this one maybe is doing this process really, really well, but then like, how do we get it to also help this process connect and
Yeah.
come together there? So I'm curious on the awareness front too, for those that are listening, maybe let us know in the comments whether you're looking at orchestration or maybe you have something an orchestration layer already in place within your operations. Would love to see where kind of our audience is at on that, so feel free to leave a comment on that. So now if we look at kind of the tracking, right, we talked about the visibility into this asset utilization, right, and how we looked at that in the report. So it's one thing to track, but then it's another to start to optimize some of that stuff. We talked about maximizing the utilization, right? So tell us a little bit about kind of what's the difference there? What's the difference between, all right, I'm tracking whether it's in WMS, whether it's on a spreadsheet or whatever the case may be, right? I see what's being utilized, I see what's happening, but how do I kind of take that tracking and get to ultimately optimizing and maximizing that utilization?
Yeah, this is something I've talked about for a long time because I think it's a
Mm.
big gap and people are getting there, right? So I don't want to say it's like a big gap for everybody, but I've been on this
Mm.
train for about a decade now, which is, data is the new oil, big data, all that, right? That's kind
Sure.
of become a thing, and everybody's heard that a billion times. But tracking step one. It's the right step one, but all that does is that gives you access to data in a single place. All right. That data harmonization
Mm.
of tracking everything. Like it doesn't, ideally, it's all in a singular system and there's data lakes and all of that. Like take that aside for a second. But being able to track things should help you optimize things, but it doesn't necessarily out of the gate by itself. So, step two, and this is the piece most people miss,
Mm.
is you need to be able to map that data you're tracking to the decision process you make. So, how do you map data to decisions? And
Okay.
that's something, if you go to any warehouse and you say, hey, what are you going to do next? and they're like, oh, well, I'm going to go through and I'm going to release the work that I need to release to the right groups. I'm just making
Mm,
this up, right? So I'm going to go waive these orders. Okay, well, how do you know you're going to waive these orders? Oh, well, I look at all this data and I figure out when it needs to be done. And I look at the data of people I have on the floor. I look at all of the different processes. And then I go and I kind of think through what I should do first, second, third based on what I know of the facility, right? That process in a person's head is the thing you need to document to
mm,
say, I use this data to get to this decision on how I waive. At which point you are then ready to start talking about orchestration, because that's what the orchestration technology should be able to automate, potentially mathematically tune. But you need the input of like, how does that data map to a decision? And if you can't perfectly map the data to a decision, it's not something you can do in software or in AI.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, it's one thing to see it, right, and have that tracking, right? But then how do we get to that next level to be able to do that, right? And we saw in the findings, right, labor obviously for everyone was the number one priority, right? Most tracked asset, but yet we found that it was the most underutilized asset, right? In contrast, where we looked at doctor utilization as well, and that was the most overutilized asset, right? So we're seeing some congestion either going out or going in some of these operations. But when we look at that, like, what do you see from like a barrier perspective on what is preventing us from improving some of this, right? Because labor, being the number one priority and most tracked asset, but then the most underutilized asset, right? It's like, all right, we're looking at that, but how are we taking that to get better and improve on that?
Well, you got to start with the operational problem of
Sure.
you can't hide. And this is, take software out of it again for a second, but you can't start with the problem of like, my labor is underutilized, but I track it the most, without acknowledging the fact that like people are people. When you're getting labor in a building, you can't just go to someone. I couldn't be like, hey, Kevin, I want you to come into the facility tomorrow, but I want you to come in. Can you show up at 11:38? And I need you to leave at 12:41, because that's actually perfectly mathematically optimal for when I
Yeah.
need, right? Like you can't do that to a person. And
Yeah.
so,
People are not receptive to that. Is that what you're saying?
well, actually, there's some interesting things with like shared workforce and temp
Sure.
workforce
Of course.
that
Yeah.
are, and that's why a lot of sites will supplement their core full-time employee headcount
Mm,
with temps during certain periods. But like that's an inherent problem is people
mm,
want to work 40 hours a week. People have to make a living. And that's like a real thing you have to consider when you're running a facility. You want your people to be engaged and happy because they're going to be more productive. And so the problem is demand is volatile. I don't have a perfect prediction of what's going to happen tomorrow, the next day, a week from now, 2 months from now. And so that's the problem we're trying to solve is you're inherently trying to fit a fixed labor schedule to an unfixed demand curve.
mm.
And so, let's call that out as like the overall, we'll call that the HR operational gap. Like mathematically
Sure. Okay.
speaking, mathematically speaking,
Hmm.
how why sites aren't able to do that more effectively is they don't actually know how many people they need for the next shift, the shift after. There's not a lot of confidence in that.
Mm,
And so that, when we talk, why do orchestration tools exist? It's not like you're going to individually make that one person pick faster. That's what a labor management software is for, right? It tells you how everybody does and if they can do something faster. This is a software that looks at, I'm going to use all the data at my disposal to help you make better decisions on how you're actually staffing your facility, short term and long term, right? If I know I only need 90 people in the building and I have 100 scheduled to come in, it's not a hard ask to say, hey, everybody come in. In 4 hours, we're going to VTO 20 people because that's the same, we're going to work a little bit ahead. Does anybody have something, anybody want to do voluntary call offs, right?
mm.
And that's a much easier conversation to have. And it's a little bit more HR permissive. And eventually you start to collect data on what that looks like through these systems. And as people leave, right, attrition in a warehouse is anywhere from 30 to 100+%.
Yeah.
You then either don't rehire or you hire people into the right roles based on everything that you're seeing, right? So I'm not surprised that labor is the number one focus, but it is the least utilized asset because of the bounds we put for ourselves. So orchestration is really about giving sites better data to better manage labor in a way they never been able to before.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, very interesting there, and I think it's such a challenge, right? As someone's managed warehouse operations before, labor is certainly one of the toughest things, right? Because it's unpredictable in some cases, right? You got to sickness breaks out right in the warehouse all of a sudden, like
Yeah.
you're short and you got to figure that out. And like you said, there's the balance there between like, okay, well, I have this labor that's trained up versus labor that's newer, and do I get the same output from them? Not all the time, right? So there becomes this kind of challenge to maintain that and, keep a level set of productivity overall. So very interesting there. And so we kind of defined orchestration already, right? Which auto schedulers does, right? Provides that orchestration layer for people. But we had this kind of great quote from the great Jim Tompkins, supply chain expert consultant in the industry. Funny enough, I was just on a call with him at 11 today, actually, by coincidence.
He's a great guy.
Yes, but we tapped into some of his quotes from previous and brought them into the report, and he talked about moving beyond managing to orchestrating, right? And the philosophy of efficiency comes from optimizing the system as a whole, not just chasing new tech, right? And I think that's a really interesting call out, especially in this world where we see so much new tech coming into the warehouse world and the industry, sometimes so much so that makes your head spin a little bit at these conferences and trade shows, right? So what's your take on kind of that philosophy and that quote there from Jim?
Love it. Right. I love new tech too. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
Um, but it comes back to what he's talking about. The best example I have of it is the theory of constraints, which I'll save everybody
Mm,
like the mathematical formulation of like what that is. But there's a really good book on this particular topic called The Goal by Ali Goldratt. I don't know
sure.
if
Yeah.
anybody's read it. But it talks to this. And when you're thinking of moving to orchestrating and optimizing the system as a whole, theory of constraints is saying go and find the bottlenecks in your operation, remove those bottlenecks, and run everything else as leanly as you possibly can. And today, there's really good ways when we talk about orchestrating is how do you do that mathematically and in software besides doing what this guy at the site did, in the book, which
Mm,
is like going one by one by one through the processes and figuring out where things were gumming up. And so completely aligned with Jim there. And I think some of the work he's put out recently has been really good on this topic.
mm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and we've had him on the podcast a couple of times too. It's been super super insightful. So we're happy we could tap some of his quotes for this. So now, tell us a little bit about just tell us about the orchestration piece, right? And you guys provide this orchestration layer from Autoscheduler, and now you also have this warehouse decision agent that you've put out there that is free to access, right? Which is awesome. I think everybody
Yeah.
loves free, especially when it comes to newer tech and trying to figure certain things out. So tell us a little bit about it. What is the new warehouse decision agent, and what does it help you do?
Yeah, good question. And I'll share with everybody. My objective on this session was I was actually going to pop up a demo and show you guys what it was doing and how you would use it and how sites should be thinking about AI in the future. Um, Ran into an audio issue on my side where when it was talking back, I could hear everything perfectly, but you guys would
Mm,
have heard nothing and it would have been a terrible demo.
yeah,
So what I'll do is I'm going to make a video of what I was planning on showing, and we can share it with anybody if they're interested.
sure.
But yeah, the agent that we have is free for use, and any site that leverages orchestration gets it. But the why is really critical.
Hmm.
Is my background's in AI. I've been in the space since 2014, and the writing on the wall of what AI is capable it has been around for a while. But when you think about warehousing specifically, right? You need to first collect all the data. We've talked about that. Step two is you need to be able to orchestrate all of that data to then inform or automate decisions that need to be made, right? That's the next step. And that can be completely automated if you want. But there's a critical missing piece still that AI is a perfect fit for is if I have all that data and I have the orchestration, which provides context into that data, it's no longer just here's my head count and what they're doing and where I'm on time and where I'm not on time. It's all of the projections into the future and the math on the bottlenecks and the constraints and what flow is going to look like and which customers are impacted. That becomes very actionable
Mm,
for large language models and agents that can then pick up that data and provide context. And so when we think about like what is the future of ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude in warehousing, one of those is being able to provide context. And so we built this agent on top of our platform. So for our paid customers, right, people that are using our whole platform, they just get access to it, and they
mm,
can ask it anything about their facility. Where is product X? What's its expiration? What does my resource utilization look like for the next 24 hours? And what should I do about it? Right?
mm,
All of that data and get answers. But the piece that I want to try to paint in everybody's mind and what I was going to show is, everybody uses Chat GPT or Gemini, and you kind of hammer away at a keyboard, and it's more of a chat like interface. Um, in warehousing, we're on the move. You don't want managers behind a computer. You want people making decisions in real time. And so the vision of this and kind of what it is and what it enables is, I want a manager walking the floor that's able to talk into a walkie or their phone and say, hey,
mm,
what does my outbound profile for today look like? And it gives them an answer on, hey, you got 35 loads you're working, 2 of them are going to be late. Here's why. Here's the doors you need to go visit, and here's who you need to talk to about it. Okay, well, what about my crewing, right? I think we're good right now, but what does it look like B and C shift? And it's able to come back and say, you're a little underutilized for B shift. You could probably tell, 5 to 10 people that, they could VTO or not come in, or, for
mm.
C shift, people that haven't even come in yet, you can go ahead and put out voluntary call offs if anybody doesn't want to show up to 10 people, right? So these agents are designed to not only inform and automate, but also contextualize all of this data in an easy to understand way for people. And that's something that's really missing right now. Like in my head, I'm like, yeah, that's the easiest thing to do with a large language model. But and that's why we made it free. Is like the large, Chat GPT and LLM, that's already built. That's easy.
Sure.
The piece that's hard is contextualizing that, and that's the data that you have with an orchestration platform. So would encourage everybody to take a look at it or reach out to folks on our team. They're happy to walk you through what it looks like, how it works, all of the above.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have Angelica that put the link there in the comments as well for everybody. So definitely check it out. And I love the approach from the usability perspective, right? Because as soon as you told me, you're like, oh, well, I can just talk to it from anywhere I am on the floor, right? I'm having flashbacks to like having to run back to my desk to look up something, or trying to walk across the operation to get to my desk to look up something, and then getting stopped like 4 times on the way, and then totally forgetting what it is I was going to look up, right? Or carrying my laptop around with me, right, to to be able to look up stuff
Well,
on the floor, right? So being able to just talk to it like on that from a mobile level, I think takes it to the next level.
we're probably more advanced than most as well. So like the
Sure.
term agent, like it has
Mhm.
function as well. It's not so quite literally you could talk to it and say, hey, I need this data, and it'll go get that data. But you can then say, hey, can you go ahead and draft an email to this carrier about this particular load that they need to plan on showing up 2 hours later than they had anticipated because we ran into this issue. And it can then, it has the capability set, whether IT organizations have the acceptance to do this.
Mm.
It'll actually draft that email for you and say, hey, here's what I've got. You ready to send? You can then look at your phone and say, yeah, go ahead and send that. And it'll go and route and send emails for you. It can,
Oh, wow.
the whole intent is, how do you make people's life easier
Mm.
in a facility? And AI is really good at that. It just needs perfect context to the data, which you can get now through orchestration platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I think that, having that little assistant there in your pocket is a big win for many in the operations world. So so you talked about a free version, and then also the paid version for your existing customers get access to all that data that's already living in that kind of orchestration layer platform that you provide. So tell us a little bit about we get a food and beverage company that has utilized this, right? So tell us a little bit about how that worked, what are they using it for, and what have been some of the kind of results around that?
Yeah. So The agent by itself, early days, feedback's been really positive though on
Mm,
all the different use cases. So for folks that don't know much about autoscheduler, we work with the Procter and Gambles of the world, PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, Mars, Kellanova, Kimberly-Clark, IKEA, really large enterprises, primarily food and beverage, some CPG, but also retail. And when we go to a site, it is a project on how do we get all your data in one place? How do we then inform sites so that they can run more effectively? How do we inform management on coaching opportunities for facilities? And how do we provide an agent that everybody can use and interact with to try to make communication easier? And so that whole package, right? You would, when you implement a WMS, it's a 6-month project and lots of pain, right? We're
mm.
talking 60 to 90 days to go from day zero to this is implemented and in use, at which point you kind of move over to the hypercare side. Um, and I can quote some of the numbers that the Frito-Lay team quoted across their manufacturing
Sure. Yeah.
network, which is their productivity level at their facilities went up anywhere from 8 to 15% at some of the facilities with heavy automation. So you're managing decisions between ASRS to AGV to labor and balancing the flows appropriately. That number was as high as 30%. Um, but your productivity goes up very quickly just by the fact of you're making better decisions and informing people with the perfect context they need to make those decisions very quickly in real time all the time.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's great to see that and hear those numbers as well. I mean, obviously that boost goes a long way and helps to, as we've been talking about, bring all those things together, right? So kind of what we've talked about here today, right, is certainly looking at the idea that a lot of operations have some type of measuring mechanism in place, right? But few are kind of getting to that ultimate optimization or the maximization utilization and then getting to that top layer of that orchestration, right? So it's not just kind of about the volume of how we utilize it, but it's also kind of the precision and the context of how we bring that all together and how we do some of this decision driven orchestration that Keith has talked to us about here today and shared with us. So I do want to open it up to the audience. If there are any questions, you can drop those in the comments. We have a couple questions that were submitted via email as well here too, that we'll cover while people are maybe thinking of questions or want to drop some in the comments here. Please do. So we had a question, Keith. The report says WMS is the universal foundation. How does an orchestration platform sit on top of a WMS without replacing it?
Yeah. So first thing is you're pulling data out of the WMS and potentially other systems. I kind of touched on that a little bit
Mhm.
earlier. But the second piece is there are actually ways to push data back into a WMS. So the WMS itself maintains, being the engine of the site. It still is
Mm,
the source of truth of data, and it is still going to be the thing that controls execution on the floor. What you can change though is the sequence in which you wave, the sequence in which you allocate, the work prioritization, who's doing what. When you're bumping people across zones, right? There are functions and ways to do that inside of WMS. And so when you're implementing orchestration, the intent is it's sitting on top and operating as the brain of that operation. So it's able to pull that data out, do all of the heavy thinking and decision making, and then push that back in, whether approved by a person or in a completely automated kind of dark warehouse way. And then just flip the right levers and switches inside of the WMS so that execution is flowing and controlled the way that you want uh, from an overall platform perspective.
got it. Okay, interesting. And I'm curious on that note, right? Like, do you still, from a user interaction perspective, right? Are you still interacting with the WMS screens, or does that change and you're interacting with an auto scheduler screen? What does that look like?
Yeah, so it depends is the best answer. We have
Sure.
some
Okay.
sites where there's no automation back in. So quite literally there's like a bunch of auto scheduler dashboards on,
Mm, okay.
80-inch monitors at the top telling them how they're attaining the plan. And then everybody's got two monitors. One's the WMS, one's the auto scheduler plan. And quite literally they're looking at auto scheduler, which tells them what to do, and then executing inside of the WMS with clicks. But we have other sites where auto schedulers open. They literally, they walk in for the day, they open auto scheduler. It tells them what they need to do. They click approve on the actions they want to approve, and that just auto flows through to the WMS. and gives them the ability to either very quickly execute those decisions and automate them, or all button too,
Yeah.
to quickly get through that.
Got it. Okay. So it's kind of a mix on how the approach can look.
It,
Understood. Okay.
it depends on comfort level. Not everybody's ready to
Sure.
automate all these actions out of the gate, and so
Yeah.
you have to be able to inform and then coach. That's kind of like any facility we go to. That has to be, we have to be able to drive value by telling them what's going on in the operation at a very granular level.
Mm.
But then when people get comfortable with that, then you start to talk, well, hey, you want to start to automate some of this? And it becomes even more frictionless, where it's just running in the background and nobody even notices.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and I think that leads perfectly into the other question that was submitted here. The case study mentions replacing tribal knowledge, right? How difficult is the cultural shift when moving to AI decision making?
Man, big. I
Okay.
it's big, right? There's a change management endeavor, and that's everywhere. Anybody that's trying to push AI adoption, which I would say we are a piece of,
Mhm.
um, you have to be really thorough. You have to understand existing processes. You have to then map AI to existing processes and highlight, if they're going to change, why they're going to change.
Mm.
Here's why. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to do about it. And then you got to listen to people. It's, I'd love to be able to go into any site and say, here's exactly how you're going to run, and I'm going to yell at you if that's not the case. The iron hammer does, that does not work necessarily.
Yeah.
Um, and so the change management is certainly an art. The technology is established at this point. Like the tech works. That's not the
Mhm.
concern.
Right.
It's the being able to coach people through it. And then there's going to be people that disagree, right? That's why you have to have coaching points and say, hey, I get you disagree, but I'm looking at your A shift for the last week, and you were overstaffed by 7 people, right? That cost
Mhm.
the business $7,000. I made the number up, but like,
Sure.
that's what we could have done. And you can see there would have been no downside impact. And so here's how we would propose we change that in the future. And that's, we have a team that's really good at doing that. And we have a lot of partners that we work with as well. And our clients are fantastic
Yeah.
at bringing change management to the table as well.
Yeah, that's great to hear because I think that's such a, I mean, no matter the solution, right? I mean, that's such a big piece of it, and the success of it is being able to navigate that change management in the proper way, right? And get people on board and comfortable, and wanting to change what their daily work looks like, which they often kind of get ingrained in a little bit, right? And being able
Yep.
to do that. So happy to hear that. And then we have a question from Todd here. Todd says, how would the platform make adjustments in real time in order to maintain optimized throughput with mix of manual and automated, example, AMR, package handling, conveyor? Not all activities are equal, and productivity from person to person is a variable.
Yeah. So I'm going to give a semi-detailed answer here, but it's thing number one is, inside of the system, you set up actors, flows, and work groups.
Mhm.
So I might have 3 different types of people in the facility. They operate in different areas at different rates. So I'm not going to say Kevin works 2 times faster than Keith. I can say if they're both in that area and they are of this actor type, the average work speed is going to be something like this. Um, and so when you're building the plan is actually looking at all of the different actor capabilities, all of the workload that is required. An actor could be a person or automation, right?
Mhm.
So you can set up 10 different actor groups, combination of people, automation, where they can work, the tasks they can do. And then when you're pulling in that demand data, you understand all of the work that needs to occur in the sequence flows, right? Simply in a warehouse, you have to inbound product before you can put it away. You have to then put it away before you can pick that product, simple stuff like that. But in real time, if you're looking at a facility with these complex flows of, I have people to manage and AMRs or package handling, what are the constraints in those? So I might know that in my pack station, I've only got pack area, I've got 7 stations, people work at this rate. What is the right way to release work to the combination of AMRs and potentially manual pick zones? And there could be 5 different zones, to where when it actually converges on packaging, you're not overrunning that area. And so how does it make real-time adjustments? Real time with this level of math is hard, right? So
Mm.
I think the fastest we're generally running is every 15 minutes, or I think some sites are every 10 minutes. We're actually looking at, what did they do? What did we say to do? what is the overall profile of where people are, or how many people you have that can move across what areas. And then you're making those adjustments and saying, here are the changes you need to make in order to execute the plan. And then you inform that. That can be communicated in any number of ways, right? It could be bump these people from this area to this area. It could be you need to drop these orders across these 7 different areas. But there's a system of decisions that then need to be made and executed. And in order to get around the volatility of people not always working to plan, is you're constantly updating the plan based on
Mm.
what you said, what you did, and the mission objectives of the site.
Yeah,
That was
great,
a
great.
long,
And
that was a
yeah.
long answer.
No problem, no problem. But I think great answer there, and I think certainly looking at that stuff. Todd is thankful. He says thanks for the answer. Makes sense. He said, there you go. So you got you got validation there, Keith. That's good. So we definitely had a great conversation here today with you, Keith, and really appreciate you supporting the report as well, and looking forward to hearing people's feedback as we start to roll this out here, and our attendees today will definitely receive that report. We also did record this as well. So if you joined us late or you joined us early and you're gone already, we will make sure we get you the whole thing to be able to do that. We'll send that to your email, as well as the link to the warehouse decision agent that you can try for free. Pretty cool stuff. I've tested it out a little bit myself. So Keith, if people want to talk more with you, or they want to learn more about Autoscheduler, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. So definitely go to our website, autoscheduler.ai. Reach out to me on LinkedIn. Reach out. There's a contact us page on the website. If there's certain things you care about, definitely fill that out there. You hit the contact us page. Someone's going to be in contact with you in a matter of hours, most likely. So there's a lot of different ways to get a hold of us. We really try to evangelize the whole mission of orchestration and love talking about it. Everybody in the company, top to bottom. So reach out if there's anything we can do to either help you or inform you or educate you.
All right, fantastic. And we'll definitely make sure we send that out in the wrap up email as well, with all the different resources from this webinar. So thank you to everybody that tuned in and joined us here today. Hope we delivered some value for you, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts and feedback on the report as well. So Keith, thank you once again, and hope everybody has a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Kevin.